Hello and welcome back to my talks on philosophy. Today I want to look at a paper of Hermann Erb, Hermann van Erb. It's called The End of History and Hegel's Conception of Modernity. But before we look into, I just want to tell you that you now can find a podcast on my website that is called Philosophy and All the Rest. So this is the website, and you see that I talked with Ken Ivory about an unexamined life. I think it was a very interesting talk, and we split it into 2 episodes. So you can watch like smaller snippets of it or the whole talk. And there will be more like such topics follow, maybe not just to social justice. I have a friend and we want to talk more about science fiction. Nevertheless, that's so much about that. I would be very happy if you look into that. But let's come to the major issue, and that is the question of the end of history and Hegel's conception of modernity von Hermann van Erb. And let's see what he says. So this is a very technical paper, right? And it basically argues that Hegel's term of the end of history, the end of time, does not imply that time overall ends. It has a very particular meaning. So it is an interpretation of Hegel's philosophy of world history, as he says here, and we will discuss the question of what is the end of history, and it is not a concept of total history including the future, but it just means that the end of history means that we free it from natural conceptions of time. We want to perceive what is the end of history, what is the goal of history, and that is a certain form of rational freedom of human beings. Now, some people might cry out immediately and say, freedom does not exist, there's only nature, we are all determined. This is a speculative topic, right? Is there freedom? Is there only nature? Hegel has a particular view on it. And he thinks that when we think human beings, we conceptualize them in terms of freedom. We cannot entirely break it down with regard to the distinction of nature and spirit, although he implies it. But we never fully know. So we treat them as two dialectical perspectives on the same issue. And we have to say that in that regard, his freedom is not just, oh, I decide to drink a Coca-Cola right now, not my brain. It's not about that. It's more about how human beings can achieve a production of themselves, which is only possible in a society that allows them to be these free, productive spirits. And so for that, we have to learn how we free ourselves from natural influences. We cannot fully do that, but we also have to analyze the sphere where we can do it, and quite in a stoic manner, we then focus only on what we can change. So let's look into the paper. So history for Hegel is the process during which spirit realizes itself. Now we have already like the term spirit, and a hardcore naturalist immediately says, well, leave me alone with these spirits. I was once mentioning the idea of spirits in a seminar, and another person said, I don't want to think about myself in terms of these spirits. I don't need spirits to be there. And I agree, it's a loaded term. It's a very religious term. But what if we didn't mean this term religiously, but we borrow it from religion because it signifies something that the sciences of nature have not yet fully explained. Maybe they can explain it, maybe they won't be able to explain it in the future. That does not matter, but it may give us an interesting perspective on what the world is. And so let's say, let me explain the term spirit. Let's say I look at a school building. This is a heap of stones. It has no meaning if we just analyze it in terms of the distribution of small little atoms and how they are arranged into this nice structure. But it has a meaning that goes beyond it, and that is that it is a school and that we treat it as a school. Now, the building of a school sometimes gets refunctioned and then we do vaccinations in there. Then it is not a school. So the way we look at it, particularly perceiving it as a school, is something that is not related to causal chain reactions in the universe, but we see that we as human beings make it a school by treating it as a school. And now somebody can say, yeah, but human beings, they're just atoms and like causal chain reactions. Okay, if you're such a radicalist and you just deny immediately that something like that could exist, yeah. But I wonder if you would be fully rational to do that, because it seems to me you don't have enough evidence to fully support your thesis that the universe is entirely causal. I think even if you try to explain the term causes, you couldn't do so very easily. So therefore, it seems to me reasonable to speculate about these subjects and say, well, look, this is what you practically do when you go into a school. You don't treat it as an object of nature, but an object of history through which humans in their communities realize themselves. And we call that they realize themselves in a spiritual manner. So far for the clarification of the term. Now we wonder, what is Hegel's philosophy of history directed at? Does it try to predict the future? And Erb says immediately, no. Hegel emphasizes that history is about the past. And history has only to do with what has been or is with events and facts. And even though he says at some point that history is about, like, always the present, because we do it in the present moment, yeah, it's not just a recording of natural events. It's the question how we organize the history according to the goals and intentions that we have at this particular historical moment. It is only through knowledge of the real course of history that philosophy can arrive at a concrete concept of how reason can realize its ends. So this is a particular view of Hegel that I support. It's a historicist interpretation, and it means that we have to study history in order to get to know ourselves and in order to produce philosophy of natures, for example, in a meaningful way, to produce a meaningful determinism and to guide our lives in these ways. And see, even if you're a hardcore natural scientist, which I claim most of the people are not, they're very reasonable, then you would have to admit that somehow what you study is still the history of science. Okay, you study a paper that was published 2 years ago. Maybe you are not interested in papers that are published 10 years ago anymore. But the papers that are written now and that are maybe in your range of 1 to, let's say, 5 years, they also include an analysis of what has been there before. Study is always a study of history. And I would go even so far that our thoughts are even already in the past. So we always come later. Our natural body is left in what is natural, in the universe, in the maybe mind external reality, but what we are interested in are way more the spirits that deal with something that they take to be the phenomena of nature. And spirits are historical phenomena. Now, of course, the question is also, well, what then is history? And history is the same. It's spirit producing itself. It is a circular structure. And somebody might intervene immediately. Well, circular structures, they prove themselves to be true, so they should not be accepted. But I think there is no way out of that circle, and we have to accept that we take relativist foundations into account And as we evaluate them as reasonable as at a certain moment in history, we can do practical stuff with it. So now we wonder, okay, what is the end of history? What do we perceive as the end of history? Now, Abt says immediately, the notion of the end of history is an ambiguous one. We have two interpretations of that. We can say it is a transcendent ideal. Now, what does that mean? It means that that is the point of convergence towards all our actions are driven to. We use it as a regulative ideal. So that means when we do something, we say, well, but we want to achieve that, right? We want to make humans free, for example. Therefore, all history goes in that direction. We could also say the end of history is to become the most powerful. Then we have a very clear idea. Well, how could we state such a goal? We had to be outside history, probably, to know what is the end of history. I don't think Hegel holds that idea. The second one is that the end of history is a moment in time where time or history stops contingently. I'm not entirely sure what he means here. He says the second would be a condemnation of history with a pure contingent end of natural time. I guess that would be like a meteorite that just crashes into Earth and ends history of humans. Or maybe the universe just stops. Maybe that is what he means. And it seems that is for Hegel paradoxical. Why is it paradoxical? Because probably this end would be perceived through a human lens, through an idea of humans. It is similar to people who state Earth does not deserve people. Humans, they should go extinct. Earth would be much better without all this harm that humans do. Now, I can understand the sentiment looking at humans that they don't act up according to their potential. And sometimes it's sad, of course. And then we say, does nature as an own entity deserve humans? But we already evaluate the purpose of nature with regard to a human ideal of how it could be done better. So it would be contaminated with ideas of the human psychology. We want a better world. And I always ask, okay, if not humans rule the world, wouldn't dolphins take over or cockroaches? Would that be better? So now Abt claims that Hegel has a solution for this paradox. And the solution of this paradox is the concept of the end of history as the fulfillment of its ultimate goal in time. So the end of history gets realized within time, does not kill time. And let's look at some examples and then we finish for today. So the life of organic beings can be thought of in this way. So we talk about organic beings. Organic beings, they live endlessly and they have an endless and tedious repetition of the same. Now, can that be an end where we just repeat the same thing endlessly again and again, where there is no development anymore? He says the concept of the end of history as a product of the spirit must involve another concept of time. A change of natural time into spiritual time. So he makes the point of spiritual time here very strong. It seems that like the mere repetition is not something that we try to achieve. If we talk about the end of history, the goal of history is not that we just remain to be the same life form over and over again without spiritual development and exposed to an endless cycle of boredom. So that's also the question. Is the end of Hegel's philosophy boredom? That would be bad, right? So therefore he looks at Hegel's concept as the permanent execution of change by reason itself. So once we get into the realm of absolute spirit, where we achieve the end of history, where we really see our goals and realize them freely, we can constantly initiate change that is necessary and are not so much subordinated to the forces of nature. Of course, nature will still exist. It comes back even when we try to control the world. But I think what Hegel has here in mind is a more Stoic conception where we change what we can change and leave what we can leave. Of course, it's a bit more difficult than that, because for Stoicists, it's always the question, like just the criticism to the Stoicists among us. How do you know what you can change and not change? Don't you have to try? Okay, that's a small criticism of Stoicism. I hope you can take that. So the end of world history is the moment in which reason recognizes itself in its objective products as the spiritual power over natural time. So you see here a spiritual power that we have to develop, and that's the end of history. With this thought, I want to finish today. Thank you for watching. If you want to read with me together the rest of the article, then look for the other episodes that I will publish on that topic. So far, thank you very much. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, find my podcast, look up the other things. All of these are in the description. And if you find that interesting, leave a comment. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.